How about now?
Hello? Hello, hello?
Oh, she got us. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. All right, Elaine. We already started the meeting. You guys just couldn't hear us. So we are just now under
9.1.
9.1. Yeah. So we will go ahead. Nancy's going to share a PowerPoint to the screen here. Give us just a moment. She'll get that pulled up and then we'll let Elaine. Okay.
We had a motion for approval of agenda by Bruce McLean, seconded by Lyle Smith. Motion carried unanimously. We also had a motion for consent agenda approval of minutes for January 20th, 2026. Motion was made by Dennis McMillan, seconded by Darren Duffloff. Also voted unanimously. The motion carried. We are currently in old business on 9.1. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We're now looking for staff's presentation for 9.1.
While she's getting that ready, I'll introduce myself again. I am Elaine Howard, one of the consultants working with you on these urban renewal areas. With me tonight is Nick Papanek from Tiberius Solutions. Nick and his team are responsible for all of the financial analysis that goes into these documents. So he will be here to be able to address any of that financial part, and he'll cover a couple of the slides in this presentation. Some of this information is information that we went over at the last meeting, although the boundaries have changed a little bit, so I wanted to make sure and show those boundary maps again, and we added one project. I think if you click on slideshow and do presentation, that you'll get a better view. There you go. Thank you. Next slide, please. You will have a separate resolution for each urban renewal plan that will set up the process for the formal review of these urban renewal plans. So those are the actions requested, is to consider those resolutions to send the draft urban renewal plans out for formal public review. Next slide. That formal public review includes this agency meeting and then starting a consult and confer process with the overlapping taxing districts. That starts by sending out a letter to them that would, if you move ahead with these, that would go out tomorrow and have a copy of the plans and reports and the taxing district impacts. The plans would go to the Planning Commission for their review for conformance with the comprehensive plan, for a county commission briefing with a citywide notice of a city council hearing, and then that city council hearing and review of a non-emergency ordinance. Next slide. The proposal is to have two separate urban renewal areas, each with a maximum indebtedness of $77,898,370. The reason there are two urban renewal areas is that limit of that maximum indebtedness is the total limit for each urban renewal area. So you couldn't have one area with a limit of 140 whatever million, but you may have two separate areas with separate maximum indebtedness limitations. Again, the maximum indebtedness limitation is the total amount of money that you're able to spend on projects, programs, and administration over the life of the plan. This does not include interest paid on debt, and Nick can talk about that a little bit when we get to the finance slides. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed East Urban Renewal area. The acreage has changed on it a bit. It was reduced. The projected assessed value, I hope I updated these. Well, we'll go ahead and look at this slide and then go ahead and go to the next slide. 373.6 acres, about $5.2 million of assessed value. The projected time frame is a little longer than what we talked about at our last meeting at 17 years. And it is 17 years because these projections include issuing upfront debt on which you'll have to pay interest. And because of that, your time frame extends a little bit. And again, Nick can cover that. And the maximum indebtedness remains the same at $77,898,370. Nick will cover the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Elaine. So the financial plan here is unique compared to a lot of urban renewal areas, in that rather than counting on many small projects to develop over the course of decades, we're really looking at one project already developed and coming on the tax rolls in the coming years. That project is overlapped by both of the proposed urban renewal areas. And based on where that divide happens, we estimate that roughly 60% of the value of the Amazon data center is going to be in the east area. So it has slightly more of the assessed value that has little impact on the financial projections, which we can explain in a couple more slides when we look at the timing of revenues coming on board. But this is sort of the linchpin of the financial forecast. The revenues are stemming from this data center coming back on the tax rolls in fiscal year ending 2035. The next slide talks about the estimated financial capacity. When it comes to financial capacity, I think there's really three numbers that are helpful, or three different lenses to understand that financial capacity. I might start with the second line down, actually, of maximum indebtedness. That's a key figure. That's a binding figure that needs to be included in an urban renewal plan that you adopt. That is required by state statute, and there's formulas that establish the maximum amount, as Elaine talked about earlier. So this is the largest amount of maximum indebtedness that this plan is allowed to have, 77.9 million. The total amount that of debt that can be incurred, which is in effect the total amount that can be spent on projects. However, because those projects are intended to be funded with debt, and that debt is going to have a cost of interest on top of it, the total amount of TIF revenue that will be needed to pay off the debt is larger than the principal amount itself. So that takes us to the top line of net TIF. That's the anticipated amount of tax revenue that the urban renewal area would receive over its duration. So $94 million of revenue collected to pay off $77.9 million of indebtedness. The difference between those being the cost of interest estimated over this time frame. The third figure on this chart is capacity for projects in 2026 dollars. So this is just reflecting that maximum indebtedness figure, 77.9 million spent on projects, but those expenditures are going to happen over the course of the next 2 decades. And projects that are built 5, 10, 20 years from now, there's going to be a significant amount of inflation that occurs between now and then. So spending 77 million spread out over the next 20 years is not the same as spending $77 million today. And when we convert those future expenditures into today's dollars to account for inflation, we estimate that the amount of project costs that could be funded with today's dollars is just under 60 million. The subsequent rows on this chart show the estimated timing of when those funds would be spent. And you can see here a little over half of the estimated funds are intended to be spent over the next 5 years. Then there'd be very limited financial capacity in years 6 through 10 before more capacity opens up again in the later years. the financing plan that allows us to get here is not something that we create. We are financial analysts, but we are not your municipal financial advisors. And so city staff are working with a separate firm that provides that financial guidance. And they propose this approach that allows the city to be able to incur this debt and fund the projects early on, even though the TIF revenue hasn't been received yet. And then the debt would incur interest during that period of time, and payments would begin once that revenue kicks in. The next slide illustrates this financing example. So we could see one borrowing proposed in 2027, next fiscal year, a significant amount funding over $25 million of projects for the East area. Another borrowing after that in fiscal year ending 2031, smaller amount of that funding for projects in the East area. And those are the gray bars on this chart. And then you can see virtually no funding for projects in this area until we see 2039. And then there's additional funding at that point. In 2039 and beyond, the dollars that you're looking at are funding on a cash basis after all the debt has been repaid for those two initial borrowings. The blue area on this chart is showing the annual TIF revenues. Again, you can see virtually no revenue generated here until fiscal year ending 2035, when it has a peak. And then after that peak, we're seeing just under $10 million worth of revenue per year. This is because of the state's required revenue sharing formulas that say any urban renewal area can only receive 12.5% of its originally adopted maximum indebtedness. And so this happens to all happen at once because the first year this project comes on the tax roll, it's going to exceed that threshold. That's that little peak that you can see in 2035. We'll be generating or receiving 15 million per year, according to our forecasts. Once that happens, then the following year, you submit paperwork to the assessor that tells them how to collect the revenue, and that's going to tell them to take the maximum amount, 12.5% from that point forward, limiting it to that's just under $10 million per year. Again, this is I would say a unique form of financing here because you have a unique situation with this data center adding this very large amount of value at a point in time in the future, but needing the funding for projects up front. And so the city has worked with their financial advisors to come up with a proposed borrowing schedule that would allow that to happen. I think I turn it back over to
Yeah,
Elaine.
I'm going to jump in here on this. You can see at the final year, there is the slant down. And that is because you actually reach your maximum indebtedness in that year you're projected to. And so you will take fewer revenues from the assessor's office. You'll take just enough to reach that maximum in indebtedness and pay off, use that to and pay off all of your debt. So that's why that goes back down again at the end. On
So
the
I've got a
next,
question. I have a quick question here. So you mentioned that we can only have 12% of the tax revenue
12.5.
total assessed value. Is that correct?
The annual tax revenue is limited to 12.5% of the maximum indebtedness. So
On an annual basis.
yeah, that's $77.9 million maximum indebtedness. That goes into a statutory formula that limits the amount of revenue you can have in individual future years.
So what if hypothetically, if Amazon were to build another data center in this east area, would that impact that?
If that data, any assessed value that comes on the tax roll after an area is collecting the maximum amount of TIF revenue does not generate any additional TIF revenue. So if there's more value being added to the tax roll sooner, then we could see TIF revenue in those earlier years. But after 2035, any increase in assessed value here is not forecast to change the financial projections.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, only PDX 63 is considered. So any future data center campus is not part of urban renewal and is completely different. They are adding a building to PDX 63 that would impact this, but if it caused the assessed value to continue to go up, then all of the excess generated would just go back out to the taxing districts as a
Okay.
higher revenue sharing.
Thank you.
Right. So this is, as I understand it, this is just a snap picture of 63 and how it adds to it.
Correct.
Okay.
So this information just takes the list provided by your staff of potential projects that you would like included in the urban renewal plan. Obviously, the amount of projects cost exceeds your amount of maximum indebtedness. We've included all of these projects because it is hoped for and anticipated that you might be able to leverage your urban renewal funds with other funding through grants or other state or federal funding that might come your way, and that you then could tackle some of these other projects because the amount of money that you have coming in from TIF is not used to pay the entire amount of each project within your plan. So therefore, your staff has given us a full list of projects, which means you don't have to do all of those projects, but you may do any of those projects without having to do an amendment to your plan. The next slide shows those projects which we think could be financed with that initial amount of with the initial amount of maximum indebtedness that Nick had indicated, and then in later years what those other priority projects would be. So if you had to pay your full amount of funding for each of these projects, these would be the potential projects that you could complete. You are not tied to these projects, but we were given these projects as the priority projects to be funded with that amount of money. So let's stop for just a minute here to see if you have any questions about the east area, because the next slides will talk about the west area.
Any questions from council this time?
No.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to 9.2.
Okay, the next slide shows the west urban renewal area. And again, this boundary changed a little bit. We have the next slide, please. Because we added the marina project, and staff made a couple of other small changes. So this is what this area looks like now. It has approximately 473 acres, an assessed value of just under 5 million. The projected time frame on this is 19 years. That's a little higher because remember on the last area, we said it was taking 60% of the Amazon value. This area is taking 40% of that value. Therefore, it takes a little longer for it to reach the maximum indebtedness. And this has the same maximum indebtedness. And on Nick's slides that he'll show in a couple of minutes, you can see that he rounds up that number of maximum indebtedness just to get you a rounded number. But the specific number that we put in the plan will be a little bit, it will be the number on the prior slide, not 77,900,000, not the rounded number. So those are just for the purposes of making it easier to look at numbers. So handing over to Nick.
Thanks, Elaine. So as you mentioned, the exact same maximum indebtedness here, because it's again limited by the statutory formula. Some interesting notes on this is that the total amount of TIF revenue needed to hit the maximum indebtedness is larger here than in the east side. As Elaine mentioned, it's going to take more years to be able to collect the total amount of TIF revenue here, and that more years means that the debt takes longer to be paid off, which means that more interest is accrued on that borrowing. And so that drives up the total cost of paying off the debt. Something else that's interesting here is that relatively more of the project costs are estimated to be funded in the early years. So because more of the projects are occurring sooner rather than later, there's less inflation that would occur on those project costs. And so the capacity in 2026 dollars is more. So in this, none of these things are written in stone. These are our best financial projections based upon the assumptions available at the time. but it looks to us as though the west area would take longer to be paid off, would require more TIF revenue to cover the cost of interest, but would actually be able to fund more real project costs in today's dollars because it's funding those projects sooner. The next tab, or next slide illustrates this. Looks very similar to the one we looked at earlier. Key differences is that borrowing in 2031 is much larger here. So we anticipate that the bulk of the borrowing in 2031 would be needed for projects in the west boundary. So a much larger influx of funding there. And then in 2035, where you see the revenue come onto the tax roll for the first time, there's not that big spike that we're expecting in the east area. We just have this very small spike that then drops down to that just under $10 million figure in all future years. That's the difference between the 60-40 split. There's more revenue for that very first year before that triggers the maximum cap in all subsequent years. Because of that, and because of the relatively larger amount of the initial borrowings here, it takes longer for this area to be able to pay off the debt. So more interest being accrued as it takes longer to be able to chip away at that. We show that debt here wouldn't be able to be paid off until 2043. And then in subsequent years at the very end, there'd be a little additional capacity for funding further projects before you hit that maximum indebtedness. And as Elaine mentioned, very final year, you can always see our revenue projection tick down a bit. That's not because the revenue is running out. It's just because that's the limit, how much you can collect to be able to pay off your maximum indebtedness, and you're not allowed to collect more revenue than that. So.
The
Elaine,
next
I
slide
think-
shows the same kind of breakout that the east area did for the west area. The biggest change on this is that in phase one, under Parks and Recreation, we did add in the Umatilla Park Marina replacement project of about $30 million. So that changed this overall calculation, and it also changed trying to get that funding earlier. So on Nick's projections earlier, it shows being able to get that money, that amount of money earlier because you had indicated it was a need. So the initial projects to be funded here, well, I put the marina replacement in both places because I knew it was very important. And I've covered the different roads there that also will have reconstruction during that time period.
Elaine, can I make a couple comments about the financing plan?
Yes, of course.
So, in working with Mesero, when we looked at these potential debt issuances, I just want to note that these are worst case scenario. They assume that 100% of the projects would be funded through bond proceeds. And then the reason that we did this to show worst case scenario is because when we send the consultant confer to the taxing districts, we're required to show kind of that highest level of impact. If we were to do something after we were to send it to the taxing districts with a more negative impact, we would have to go ahead and notice that again. So we looked at what is our highest cost of debt issuance with the plan to still try to find other matching funds. And so just want to preface that we're also not locked in to funding these projects with this financing plan. It's just a plan. Assumptions can change, project timelines can change. So I just want to be really clear that although it's in here, we're not obligated to go with this exact route. It's just to show kind of the most high cost to do the debt issuances. When we looked at the projects that we would fund through debt issuances, the first set in 2027 includes the roundabout project and the phase one of Powerline Road because we're contractually obligated to complete those improvements before 2030. And so we couldn't wait until 2035 when we start getting the TIF revenue. We also included the Hash Park improvements and then improvements to 7th Street to improve safe routes to school for the kids. And then the second bond issuance that we did, the reason that you see that big spike in the west area is because it did include the Umatilla Marina improvements. and 8th Street. And then in the east area, it included Columbia and Willamette, so street improvements up in McNary. So that's kind of just with the financing plan, how we have that broke apart, if there's any other questions there.
So I've got a quick question. So just doing some back of the napkin math, I'm getting around like $40 million in total interest payments. Is that about right?
So it's right if you do a zero coupon bond, which
Okay.
we can do, but we wouldn't have to. So we have options, like I said, that's the highest interest cost that we would
Right.
incur. If the city is in a position when we do those issuances where we want to make periodic payments up front from the general fund and have the urban renewal area pay us back. If it's something that we have the financial capacity to do, we have that option. It would lower the interest expense later on, but that is an accurate interest expense if we don't make any payments until the TIF revenue starts coming on.
I would much rather have a worst case scenario and it be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm all
More-
for worst case
more
scenarios. I'm just curious about, if, I feel like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul here a little bit, where my concern is that if we're gonna lose, $40 million in tax revenue to interest to a bank, then why aren't we just doing these projects spoon fed over 40 years or 30 years?
Well, it sounds like some of them we have to step
Right.
out, the roundabout and the others for
Mhm.
sure. And and I know we need to get that stuff for the kids down by, is it 6th and 7th? Or 7th and 8th right there that we're obligated to
7th
get
and
done.
Yeah.
The street.
So, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the biggest thing for me is that I'm excited about this project because we can get sooner than later instead of having to cripple along, you know?
Yeah, my concern is just the amount of interest.
Sure.
If we're losing $40 million of other projects we could be doing to interest, that's my.
So
No, I
we would, to
completely-
be clear, we don't lose borrowing capacity by issuing debt. The interest is not factored
Right.
on that limitation. And when we get to the point a little further down the line where we're exploring the actual issuance options, we will run further scenarios with our financial consultants and bring that back to council. But for today, we just wanted to show those balloon payments at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from council?
No, the only comment I had, the stuff that's in there is fantastic.
Mhm.
Curbs and gutters and sidewalks and places that we really, 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 really need them. And
Agreed.
finally going forward with stuff that we should have done a long time ago, but we didn't. So,
Always excited to see Willamette Street improvements. That's
oh
been
yeah,
needed for
me too.
50 years.
Do we have a projection on how much we save by doing this earlier? Because we're looking at inflation
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
So if we do it 5 years from now rather than 15, there's savings in that inflation.
Sure.
And it may come close to matching the interest.
I didn't even think about that.
I
You're
didn't think
right.
about it
This is
either.
30%. Everything's 30%. It doesn't matter if sometimes 40%. So
Mhm.
yeah, good call.
Yeah, good point.
For sure. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, we would definitely lose borrowing capacity to delay the projects because
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
base project cost would be much higher if we deferred it.
Okay.
And
Very good.
Elaine, I think she's got a couple more slides.
Oh,
to
go ahead,
finish
sorry.
up.
Just two more. We are required to assess whether you meet the statutory limitations. The limitation for acreage is 25%. Your staff has helped us work this so that we're just under that 25% limitation. But what that does mean is that you really don't have capacity to add to these urban renewal areas unless you take some acreage away from them. On your assessed value, because that Amazon is not yet assessed, you're at a very low percentage, only at 1% of the total assessed value. So you have plenty of capacity there. But once that Amazon comes out of the enterprise zone establishment, that obviously changes a lot. But for the purposes of adopting these two plans or moving forward with them now, you are within those statutory limitations. And then the next slide just reiterates what those next steps are. So consulting and conferring with the taxing districts, planning commission, briefing to the county, and then city council hearing and review of non-emergency ordinance. And you tonight, I believe, have 2 resolutions for consideration.
Thank you very much for your presentation. This time, is there any questions from council?
No.
Okay, no further questions. We have these flip-flopped on the agenda, but we can pass them as one single thing. So we're looking for a motion right now to approve the URA resolution number 1, 2026, and the UR resolution number 2, 2026.
I move that we accept URA Resolution number 1, 2026, and URA Resolution number 2, 2026.
Thank you very much for your motion. We're looking for a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Motion is first and second, looking for a roll call at this time.
Counselor Funderburk. Aye. Counselor Dufflock.
Aye.
Counselor Katie McMillan.
Aye.
Counselor Smith.
Aye.
Counselor Dennis McMillan.
Aye.
Counselor McLean.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Moving on now to adjournment at this time. Any further questions from council or any questions from staff? Okay, we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we adjourn the what is this called? URA.
URA.
Yeah,
URA.
this meeting, URA meeting.
Thank you for your motion. Take a second motion, please.
I'll second that.
Motion to the first and second, get a roll call at this time.
Counselor Funderburk.
Aye.
Counselor Dufflock.
Aye.
Counselor Katie McMillan.
Aye.
Counselor Smith.
Aye.
Counselor Dennis McMillan. Counselor McLean.
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. This meeting
Really? Yeah.